They kicked me out of the family barbecue because I didn't want to pretend like nothing happened. I'll never forget the way my uncle's voice carried over the clinking of beer bottles and the sizzling sound of sausages on the grill when he said it, loud enough that everyone could hear, pointed enough that it cut straight through me. I wasn't even holding a plate yet, hadn't even sat down to eat, and already the message was clear. Play along with their version of events, or don't bother staying. The thing is, if you'd been standing there as a stranger, you probably wouldn't have even noticed the tension. On the surface, it looked like every other backyard barbecue in my family's long, messy history. Kids chasing each other around the trampoline. Oldies playing from a portable speaker. My dad hunched over the grill in his Kiss the Cook apron like he was manning a Michelin star restaurant instead of a rusty barbecue from Bunnings. But underneath it, the air was thick, because I knew, and they knew, that there was something none of us had dealt with, something that had been brushed under the rug for too long, and I wasn't willing to smile, eat potato salad, and act like it didn't exist. Let me rewind a little, because otherwise none of this will make sense. A few months earlier, something happened, something in the family that cracked the shiny, happy mask we'd all been wearing for years. I won't go into every detail yet, but it was one of those incidents that divides people into sides, the kind where silence becomes complicity. And that's what they wanted me to do. Stay silent. Pretend it never happened. Pretend the people who were hurt weren't still hurting. Pretend I wasn't lying awake at night, replaying the moment in my head, wishing I had said more, done more, been louder. So when the invitation for the barbecue came, my wife asked me, "Are you sure you want to go?" I hesitated. A part of me wanted to skip it, to avoid the awkwardness altogether. But another part of me, the stubborn part, thought maybe this was my chance. Maybe I could finally bring it up, finally force people to look at what they were ignoring. Family, after all, is supposed to be the place where you can tell the truth, right? That naive part of me is the reason I ended up standing in my parents' backyard, paper plate in hand, feeling every set of eyes waiting for me to either fall in line or cause a scene. It started small. My cousin offered me a drink, and when I shook my head, he muttered, "Still being dramatic, huh?" A few minutes later, my aunt tried to steer the conversation toward her holiday photos, probably thinking if we filled the space with enough chatter, no one would notice the elephant sitting at the picnic table. But I noticed, and when I finally opened my mouth to say, "Look, we can't keep pretending like this didn't happen," that's when the air snapped. My uncle, beer in hand, cut me off before I could say another word. "We don't want to hear it. Not today. Not here. Either enjoy the barbecue or leave." I stared at him, the sausages hissing behind him, and realized he meant it. He would rather throw me out of my own family gathering than let me break the silence. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't just being excluded. I was being punished for refusing to play along. It's strange how quickly a place can stop feeling like home. I had grown up in that backyard, learned to swim in the above-ground pool that used to stand in the corner, burned my tongue on corn cobs my dad always took off the grill too late, sat at the kids' table long after I wasn't a kid anymore. And yet in that instant, with my uncle glaring, my father avoiding my eyes, and my mother fiddling with the salad tongs like they were rosary beads, I felt like an outsider, like I had trespassed somewhere I didn't belong. My wife touched my arm and whispered, "Let's go." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to, because she knew as well as I did that staying would only mean swallowing the bitterness down, pretending to be okay when I wasn't. So we left. Walking out that gate, I could still hear the laughter behind us. Forced laughter, too loud, the kind people use to cover up the sound of something breaking. And maybe that's what stung the most. Not that they kicked me out, but that they carried on without me, like I was expendable, like the truth was expendable. The ride home was quiet at first. I stared out the window, watching the suburbs blur by, while my wife kept glancing at me, waiting. Finally, she said, "You knew this was going to happen, didn't you?" I nodded. I hoped I was wrong. "So what now?" she asked. That was the question, wasn't it? What now? Because here's the thing about families. They're supposed to be unshakable, the people you can rely on when the world turns ugly. But what happens when the ugliness comes from inside the family? What happens when the very people who taught you about honesty, about loyalty, about sticking together, demand that you betray all of it just to keep the peace? That night, lying in bed, I replayed the barbecue in my head. Every glance, every muttered comment, every time someone looked away instead of meeting my eyes. And I thought back to what started it all, the thing I wasn't supposed to mention, the reason they wanted me silent. I thought about the night it happened, the way the room went quiet, the way no one wanted to step in. And I realized something. They didn't kick me out because I was wrong. They kicked me out because I was right, and they couldn't handle it. Over the next few weeks, the phone stayed silent. No calls, no texts. My parents didn't reach out. My brother didn't check in. It was like I had been erased. And part of me wanted to pick up the phone, to apologize just to get them back. But another part, the part that remembered the look in my uncle's eyes when he said leave, knew I couldn't. Because if I went back now, if I apologized for speaking the truth, I'd be agreeing to live a lie. And that's where part one leaves off. Me standing in the wreckage of what used to be my family, torn between the comfort of silence and the cost of honesty, knowing the next move I make will decide which one I choose. The silence after the barbecue was worse than the shouting. I thought maybe after a few days someone would call. Maybe my dad would show up at my door with that awkward half apology he always used when he didn't want to admit he was wrong. Maybe my mom would send one of her long texts with too many emojis, trying to smooth things over without ever addressing what caused the fight in the first place. But no one did. The phone stayed quiet. My inbox stayed empty. And the longer it went on, the more I realized they weren't just waiting for me to cool off. They were waiting for me to cave. That's how it always was in my family. The unspoken rule was that the one who breaks the silence first is the one who admits guilt. And I wasn't willing to carry that weight this time. I wasn't going to pretend like nothing happened just to get a seat at the table again. But here's the part I haven't told you yet. The thing that started all of this. The reason why I couldn't just smile and eat sausages like everyone else. It was about my brother. Months before that barbecue, he did something that crossed every line I thought we had as a family. He had been drinking too much at my parents' house one night, and in the middle of an argument with his girlfriend, he shoved her hard, right there in front of me, in front of my parents, in front of half the family. She stumbled back into a chair, shocked, holding her arm. And you know what happened? Nothing. Everyone just froze. My mom rushed to her, offering ice and tissues. My dad muttered, "That's enough, son." But no one really called it what it was. No one said, "That's abuse." No one said, "That's unacceptable." I did. I stood up shaking and said, "You can't do that, ever. You need to leave, and you need help." And the room turned on me, not because they thought I was wrong, but because I said it out loud. Because I put words to something they all wanted to bury. My brother stormed out, slamming the door. His girlfriend left not long after, pale and silent. And when the dust settled, my dad looked at me and said, "Why did you have to make it worse?" Worse. As if the problem wasn't the shove. It was me refusing to play along with the silence. That night, I drove home with my wife beside me, both of us shaking, and I said, "If they want to pretend this didn't happen, fine, but I won't." And that's why the barbecue exploded. Because when I showed up and refused to laugh and joke like my brother hadn't laid his hands on someone, I broke the illusion they were clinging to. After they kicked me out, the isolation hit hard. Holidays came and went. Birthdays passed. My brother's name still showed up in family group chats. Photos of him smiling next to the very people who told me to leave. It was like nothing had happened, except for the hole where I used to fit in. My wife tried to fill the silence. She'd plan little dinners with friends, drag me out for walks, put Ethan, our son, in my arms and say, "This is your family now." And she was right. But there were nights I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had overreacted. Wondering if maybe, just maybe, I should have just shut my mouth that night and spared myself the loneliness. One night, a few months after the barbecue, I got a call from my cousin Sarah. She lowered her voice like she was sneaking a confession. "I just want you to know," she whispered. "You weren't wrong. We all saw it. We don't know how to deal with it." Her words were like a crack in the wall. Proof that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined the shove, that I wasn't the villain for saying it out loud. But it also made me furious. Because if she knew I was right, why didn't she back me up? Why didn't she stand up at the barbecue, or after, or any time? That's when I understood something painful. Sometimes family isn't about who loves you most, but about who fears rocking the boat least. And I had rocked it so hard the whole thing nearly capsized. Months turned into almost a year. Then came the wedding, my brother's wedding. He was marrying someone new, and the family expected me to show up. I got a text from my mom, "Please come, it's time to move forward." Not "it's time to talk about what happened." Not "it's time for your brother to apologize." Just move forward, as if forgiveness could be forced by showing up in a suit and clapping politely. I didn't go, and that decision split things even further. My dad called, his voice full of anger, saying, "You've embarrassed us. You've embarrassed him. You're not part of this family anymore. It should have hurt more than it did." But by then, I had already been living without them for so long. The words felt more like confirmation than a wound. But here's the twist I didn't see coming. 6 months after the wedding, my brother's new wife called me. I didn't even know how she got my number. She sounded nervous, like she was afraid someone would overhear. And she said, "I just want you to know. You were right. He hasn't changed." My stomach dropped. She didn't go into detail, but she didn't have to. I heard it in her voice, in the way she said, "I don't know how much longer I can do this." After that call, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake thinking about how my family had rallied around him, protected him, shoved me out, all to preserve the illusion of nothing happened. And meanwhile, he was still doing it. Still hurting people, still enabled by their silence. That was when I stopped doubting myself. I realized I hadn't been too harsh. If anything, I hadn't been loud enough. I won't lie, it's lonely sometimes. Family barbecues still happen without me. I see the photos online. Everyone crowded around the grill, smiling like nothing is wrong. And maybe for them, nothing is. Maybe pretending is easier than facing the truth. But every time I tuck my son into bed, every time I look at my wife and know I've chosen honesty over comfort, I feel lighter. Because here's what I've learned: family isn't about blood. It isn't about barbecues or birthdays or who shows up in the group chat. It's about who stands with you when the truth is ugly. And if that means my circle is smaller now, then so be it. They kicked me out of the family barbecue because I didn't want to pretend like nothing happened. But I'd rather be outside the gate with my integrity intact than inside, holding a plate of sausages, choking on silence. And if my son ever asks me why we don't see his grandparents much, I'll tell him the truth. Because silence may keep the peace for a night, but truth is what keeps you free for a lifetime.